Welcome back. It's a new day in my world, and it's time to talk about hypnosis. So we're still in chapter 2, still talking about the biology of mind and behavior, and we have a section discussing an alternative state of consciousness called hypnosis. Now, this is kind of a tricky section because while all of us sleep and all of us dream, not all of us can be hypnotized. So it really makes us wonder whether hypnosis is a state of consciousness that's comparable to other states of consciousness that we've been talking about. You might be interested to know what factors go into hypnotizability. Some researchers have kind of pinned down the characteristics of hypnotizable people. One thing that seems to be really critical to hypnotizability is being able to get absorbed in activities that involve a lot of imagination. If you're the sort of person who, when reading a book, you could lose track of time and get swept away by the plot and the characters, and you really feel like you know them. If you can cry over a book that you're reading, you might be hypnotizable. Or crying over movies and things, you might be able to get that empathetically tied together to what you're experiencing. That might be a sign that you're hypnotizable. Other things that you might get absorbed in, daydreaming. If you are a person who can really easily get swept away in a daydream and kind of forget where you are and what you're supposed to be doing, things like that, time has passed and you don't realize it, that can be a sign that you might be hypnotizable. So basically the idea of being able to sort of get swept away mentally with, things going on inside your head, that's important. Being able to focus on fantasy information and lose yourself in it. Just get completely sort of swept away with it. If you've ever gone into a movie and it was daytime and you just got so engaged in the movie that when you came out and it was dark, you're like, wait, how long were we in there? How many hours was that? It felt like a super fast because I just got so swept up and lost in this fantasy world of this movie that I was watching. So those are sort of some hints. You'll notice on the list there weren't any things about being gullible or suggestible. Actually, I am careful with that word because suggestible, we oftentimes in our everyday language mean it kind of as a bad quality. Other people could trick you. But in psychological terminology, what we mean is you can take on the context really well, for good or for bad. Sometimes we can take on the context and it can be harmful to us, but other times when we get swept up in the context that's being provided by a hypnotist, for example, them suggesting that you're a chicken or things like that can cause you to kind of go along with their storyline. So it's not a sign of weakness to be hypnotizable, which some people mistakenly believe. It is not a sign of weakness. Now, we've been studying hypnosis since Freud tried to use it as a therapeutic technique back in the late 1800s. He was actually the first one to really comment on the fact that not everybody could be hypnotized. And he found that really frustrating because he wanted to hypnotize people because he thought it was a treatment method. And so he had to come up with another way to treat people who were not hypnotizable. And we'll talk about that more when we get to abnormal psychology. But so we've been studying it since his time, trying to figure out what is it, what can it do for us, things like that. So we've got kind of a little list of things that hypnosis can do for you. One thing that's been shown over and over again is that we can use hypnosis to block your awareness of pain. Research studies have hypnotized participants and then poked them with pins, or some researchers have actually hypnotized people who were going to have like root canals, which can be very painful and need a lot of Novocaine. Instead of having the Novocaine, they get hypnotized, and then we check to see whether they report that they're experiencing pain during the procedure. And it looks like they don't. The way that the research is usually done is that the person gets hypnotized, they undergo the procedure, and the hypnotist tells them, if you experience any pain, I want you to tap your leg or something that's handy like that during the procedure. And they found that when people were hypnotized correctly and then had dental procedures conducted, none of them tap their legs. None of them seem to be aware of any pain that they're experiencing. So it looks like it blocks your awareness of pain. There has been some benefits to the use of hypnosis plus other behavioral strategies to reduce obesity, anxiety, hypertension. So it can work in conjunction with, for example, a reduced calorie diet or other therapeutic techniques for anxiety or, an altered, exercise regime and food choices for the treatment of hypertension, stuff like that. It doesn't work by itself. You can't skip the hard work and just get hypnotized and lose weight. It doesn't work like that. And it only seems to work if the person's really dedicated to the process. If you hope that it'll be the kind of thing that you can do without having to try very hard, hypnosis doesn't do that. It just gives you a little bit of added resistance to temptations and things like that. But you have to really want it. Hypnosis does seem to help improve concentration when people are doing tasks like watching a radar screen for incoming airplanes, things like that. They can concentrate better when they've been hypnotized. On certain kinds of cognitive tasks, people actually perform better under hypnosis than they do when they are not under hypnosis. So it's sounding pretty good, right? But it only seems to improve or emphasize things that you already want. Like, I don't want to be experiencing pain, so I'm motivated to block that pain. I want to notice all the planes that are coming in on the radar screen. So I'm motivated to do these things. Hypnosis cannot work without your intent. It seems to facilitate what you already are invested in. It doesn't create motivation on its own. So you have to be an active participant in the hypnosis. In the past, there have been movies where people get hypnotized and then they become like zombies almost, where they have to do what their hypnotic controller is telling them to do, or if they hear a certain noise, all of a sudden they go into robot mode and they have to murder everybody, or things like that. These have been movie plots, right? That's not how it works. You have to want it. You have to be actively involved in it to get it to work. It doesn't give you superhuman abilities. At the fair, one of my friends volunteered to get up on the stage, and the hypnotist told him, this is a barbell that weighs 300 pounds, when it was really a broomstick with a roll of paper towels on either end. And he tells my friend, it's 300 pounds, but you can lift it. You can do it. And it's funny because when he got off the stage, he goes, it really did feel heavy. It felt heavy to me, but I knew I could do it, so I was able to do it. He was really buying the whole thing. I think part of why he was buying the whole thing is because in a lot of our understandings of hypnosis, it should be able to make you lift more than you can really lift, but it can't. It doesn't give you superhuman strength. It doesn't give you superhuman memories. It doesn't give you superhuman anything. All it does is sort of emphasize what you're already trying to do. It doesn't give you access to things that you otherwise have forgotten. If you can't retrieve the material consciously through effort, it's probably not accessible, and hypnosis isn't going to reveal that. Back in the late 60s, there was some research that implied that hypnosis could reveal hidden memories, and actually that was sort of what Freud had thought would happen with hypnosis, that he'd be able to hypnotize people and then they would reveal their repressed memories, and then he could work through them. So there's been a long history of believing that you have a secret place to store memories somewhere in your mind, and that hypnosis would reveal those. And so in the 60s, they were really studying that question. And it turns out that a lot of times people would offer new information while under hypnosis, kind of giving the impression that they had access to material they had otherwise forgotten. But then when they double-checked the accuracy of the information that the person provided under hypnosis, it wasn't accurate. So it looks like maybe people are suggestible while under hypnosis, and they're like, well, I should be able to remember something. Here, let me come up with something. They offer something, when in fact they aren't remembering anything different or better. They're just generating something new. All right, so now that I've gotten some of the sort of stereotypes about hypnosis out of the way, let's talk about how psychology has attempted to explain what hypnosis is. All right, here we have a nice 1960s example. We've got the hypnotized patient in the chair. The hypnotist is holding a bottle of ammonia under the hypnotized person's nose and telling her I'm holding a rose underneath your nose. Now, anyone who has smelled ammonia knows you cannot sit there calmly sniffing ammonia and think it could possibly smell like a rose. I mean, if you've ever sniffed it, it feels like it's making your nostrils crinkle. It's painful to smell. So her sitting there so calmly while breathing in the odors of ammonia already looks like something is off, right? Let alone the fact that she thinks it's a rose. And she's like, oh, it smells so good. It's so fresh like a rose. Absolutely something's going on here. So how? How is she not recoiling like any of the rest of us would do if we smelled ammonia? Well, one theory says that her consciousness has been divided, that she now, because she's hypnotized, she has the things that are actually happening in the real world, and then she has the things that her mind thinks is happening. And all that really matters is what's happening in her mind. And so she's actually divided and unaware of the actual things that are happening in the world. So her mind thinks it's a rose, so her brain reacts as if it's a rose. And that's it. She has divided her consciousness and only is applying attention to what's going on inside of her own head. So the divided consciousness theory, this theory does a good job of explaining, for example, the use of hypnosis for pain, right? Because if I can divide my consciousness and put my attention on something other than the pain, then I may not actually be aware of the pain. To test that hypothesis, researchers hypnotized patients, told them, okay, while you're doing this, dental procedure, you're not going to feel any pain. I want you to tap on your leg if you feel any pain. And then I'll ask you afterwards what it all felt like. And what they found is that some of the participants did tap on their legs during the procedure, but when they were brought out of hypnosis, they reported not having felt any pain. So what would that mean? Why am I tapping while I'm hypnotized? And then when I'm unhypnotized, I report I didn't feel any pain. Well, this theory would say, while they were hypnotized, they actually experienced it, but their conscious mind was unaware of it. So when they were brought out of the hypnosis, they don't remember because their attention was on something else. So they don't remember that they felt pain, even though they probably did during the procedure. That kind of divided consciousness allows hypnosis to work for things like childbirth and other kinds of things, right? You can take your mind off of what you're experiencing so that it's not as painful. Social influence theory says the subject is so caught up in the role of hypnotized participant that they ignore the real world so as to just focus on the things that are consistent with their role. So this person is in the role of being a good hypnotized participant. Part of being a good hypnotized participant is doing what the hypnotist says, and the hypnotist says, you're not going to smell this. It's going to smell like a rose. So being a good participant, she's being influenced by that hypnotist and taking on the suggestions that he's offering. So two different kinds of theories. There's a third theory that is not on this chart because it's mostly discounted, but the third theory is that it literally is a different state of consciousness. And there is actually some evidence that supports the notion that when you're in hypnosis, that you're in an altered state of consciousness because the brainwave patterns are different than we would expect in a person who's awake. I think they're beta waves that you see when the person's hypnotized. I don't remember, so don't write that down. So the fact that your brain is in a slightly different brainwave pattern than you would expect from a waking person or a person who's asleep does make us think, well, your brain is in a different condition than it normally would be in. But the idea that it's a legitimate altered state of consciousness like sleep or like being under the influence of drugs or something like that, that's not a very popular theory anymore. Mostly we're trying to figure out divided consciousness or social influence. When you talk about hypnosis, I feel like it depends on what kind of hypnosis you're referring to, which one of these theories will make more sense. Pain management makes a lot of sense that it might be divided consciousness. Social influence, it makes a lot of sense that it might be while you're working with a therapist or while you're doing a stage show where, you're a hypnotized person and you're being told to sing like Elvis and other kinds of things, you can imagine how powerful the social influence is. Something I want to foreshadow for when we get farther into the text and we start talking about memories and things like that. Sometimes when people are hypnotized by their therapist, when they're brought out of the hypnotic state, the therapist will tell them about things that they said while they were under hypnosis. And of course, the person will say, well, I don't remember having said any of these things, I guess because I was hypnotized. And the therapist will say, oh yeah, you said accusations about somebody having molested you when you were a child or something like that while you were hypnotized. It turns out that while we're hypnotized, we are pretty suggestible. And so if our therapist brings us out of hypnosis and tells us that we said things that we have no knowledge of having said, we might believe our therapist and think that people have harmed us, or that we say that people have harmed us that really haven't. And there have been a lot of lawsuits against therapists who have told their patients that they said things under hypnosis that turned out to be objectively not true. The accused was not there. They were out of town on that date, or other kinds of things. I mean, there's no way that what the therapist says is true, but it has caused a lot of pain in families as clients have internalized what their therapists have said and then separated from their families or accused their family members of things. So hypnosis is not considered a legal way of obtaining information for criminal charges or for accusations because of that, because we're very suggestible while we're under hypnosis because of that social influence component. So something to be really aware of, that hypnosis does not suddenly reveal the truth. And in fact, it might reveal things that are more true about the therapist or the hypnotist than they are about the person who's been hypnotized. All right, enough on that. So we are on to Chapter 3. So I will see you next time for a nice discussion of Chapter 3.